We do have the great George Allen on, former governor of Virginia, former U.S. Senator of Virginia. You can follow him at George Allen VA at Twitter. And then he also has it on Facebook, George Allen on Facebook. Governor, Senator, you've done so many things. I don't know what to call you anymore. But George, thanks so much for coming on the program. Appreciate you always coming on here.
Well, it's good to be with you. Good to see you again. And I see you got basketballs behind you on the screen.
We do, Senator. But I want to start off with a little football talk, Senator. And it seems like Tennessee football, who I know you're a fan of, is in a little bit of deep doo-doo right now, losing some scholarships on probation for 5 years. Let's start off light with that.
Okay. Well, I do like the Tennessee Vols, and there's no better college fight song than Rocky Top. And it's not just me saying it. USA Today said that about 8 years ago. The previous coach, the Pruitt regime, had infractions. The University of Tennessee reported them. They cooperated. The NCAA may not have ever known about it. And I think they got actually the great worry for the Tennessee football team was, would they be banned from bowl games? And so they did punish them and save these players who played and shouldn't have been playing and such. They tuck away those wins from those years past, and it may have taken Tennessee out of the top 10 in all-time wins for a college program. I think they were number 9 or number 10. However, they've already cut back on some of the scholarships anyway. They imposed their own penalty on themselves on some of those scholarships, and there'll be a few more that are be reduced, I think, until 2028. But they still can play in bowl games. They still can compete for the national championship, which matters a great deal to the motivation of a team. You want to win. You want to get into the playoffs, especially when the playoffs are getting expanded from 4 to 12 teams. And so they're very happy. They understand what was done was wrong. They admitted it. They've taken the punishment, but it could have been much worse punishment. And the other thing with the NIL, with the name, image, and likeness, to punish players who are on the team now for infractions of a coaching regime that wasn't even there when they got recruited and played on, isn't fair. And then when you put in the NIL, which wasn't available when these infractions happened 4 or 5 years ago, that means they have diminished earnings. And so then a lot of them would have to transfer from the university they wanted to be at. Not all of them would, but some would. You'd have some of them saying, all right, if I stay here where I made a commitment, I'm not going to have these same monetary opportunities as I would if I was at another college. So I think it all turned out for the best. They've turned the page. The new regime, the new athletic director, and the new coach, relatively new coach now, Josh Heupel, have them really going in the right direction. It ought to be an exciting season. And I think, of course, they have to get through Georgia in that SEC East, and they have to get through them just to get to the SEC championship game. That's why the SEC of all the conferences would like to have more teams available for the playoffs rather than just 2 out of 4. They'd like to get maybe 3 or 4, possibly 5 out of the 12. And the Big Ten would get a second one, probably 2, especially with Ohio State and Michigan always being such top programs. And others come up every now and then, like Wisconsin or Nebraska might get back to its top tier football program out of that.
Well, Governor, I'll tell you what, though, the SEC is really chugging along. We got Texas and Oklahoma coming. As a Gator fan, we're rivals with Tennessee, but regardless of that, Governor, I'll tell you this. I mean, the SEC is really coming up the ranks. I mean, it's great already. And then, like I said, with Texas and Oklahoma coming in, we're talking about every sport, football, baseball, And basketball, these schools coming in are really going to kick some butt. It's going to be tough for us as SEC fans to really keep up with these teams in general. I want to bring up the NIL quickly, just since you tapped into that, Governor. With that said, with the NIL, you were in the Senate for 6 years. Do you believe this is something that needs to be decided by the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House, that there has to be these rules and regulations placed in? There was a guy at Florida that didn't end up coming there, but he was supposed to be coming this year, a governor. He was supposed to make like $15 million. This is a guy coming in as a freshman in college. You don't even know, you see what he did in high school. That's high school talent. This is a whole different ballgame in the SEC. You know this, and so do I. Does the House and the Senate need to step it up and put some regulations and some meat on these bones here?
They could. I don't see it happening, though, to be honest with you. There does need, first of all, I like NIL. I like freedom of movement. I like free agency. I dislike the fact that college football players have to spend 3 years in college before they can turn pro. The college system is a farm system, or minor leagues for the NFL. And baseball, Major League Baseball, they have minor league teams in Norfolk and in Gwinnett and in Nashville and a variety of different places, and they get paid. But in football, the reason they get away with this restraint of trade is because there's a collective bargaining agreement between the NFL Players Association, the union, and management. Otherwise, this restraint of trade, because the NFL, pro football, is in effect a monopoly. The only other option is the Canadian Football League, and they limit how many non-Canadians can play. So I'm glad players have the ability to move where they want, just like any other student. A chemistry student can move from college to college if the chemistry student says, gosh, I like their labs better than, I like the labs at Georgia Tech better than the labs we have here at Auburn, or something like that. So all of that is good, but there needs to be some guardrails in it. It is that because you get these transfer portals twice a year, it's hard to keep coherence and unity on a team with all of that. And you also have, say you have a player who's a good player at Old Dominion University. They say, hey, transfer here to Clemson, or transfer to Tennessee, or somewhere, where you such and such. So you could get Congress to do it. The NCAA is so gun shy legally that whatever they try to do, they'll probably lose. And so either Congress needs to act and say, here's the law, and this is how we're going to operate. Again, they can't restrict NIL. They should not restrict transferring. But you can, again, I use the term guardrails or some parameters so that you can transfer, let's say, at the end of the football season until spring practice. Just say you have the ability to make your transfer between January 2nd and March 2nd, or April 2nd, whatever it may be, not after spring ball and after summer. I mean, some of these folks are trained. Some of them switching in the midst of summer, fall ball, or, summer training camp. And that's just, you got to stick to something.
What about the money limit, Governor? Because
I don't care how much money they make. That's
okay.
The marketplace to decide how the money is made.
Wouldn't you oust a lot of these smaller schools? You brought up Old Dominion, all these kind of smaller football schools. You're just bringing all these kids into a factory. We like these teams, Florida, Tennessee, Kentucky, Texas, Oklahoma, because they can afford it, because they got all this money behind them with the boosters, whereas you got these schools like Northwestern, Old Dominion. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Yeah. No. There's several things. It's the marketplace that ought to decide that. Here's where I think the NCAA is going to have to handle it, possibly. And this is an interesting discussion with you. And I've brought it up to certain people that I don't want to say who they are, but they're very knowledgeable in college football. Sure. I'm not one who generally advocates for unions, for right to work, but they may need to create something like the College Football Players Association. And that association, that union, negotiates with the NCAA and says, all right, these will be the rules. And the courts will uphold that because they have bargained for it. And of course, it'd be maybe different in right to work states where students would not, or athletes wouldn't have to pay union dues, but they'd still be bound by the rules of that collective bargaining agreement. But there really does need to put, they need, again, you like freedom of contracting, but you know, there's again, rules, and there should be some better rules on it. Interestingly, on the I just read it this morning that Manning, the Manning who went to Texas.
Yeah, Archie Manning's not Archie Manning. It's
Archie Manning's grandson.
Grandson, yes.
Is
he's going to Texas, yeah.
Arch, I think his name is Arch.
Yeah, he's going to be redshirting this year, and they'll probably play.
Right. But he's gotten a $15 million contract from someone, but they're going to put all the money into some charity because his grandfather, Archie Manning, said to him, he says, you shouldn't make any money until you're a starter. And now that's the ethics of the Manning family. And Archie Manning was my hero growing up. I liked Ole Miss because of Archie Manning. But that's someone of special character, but I can't begrudge someone for making money with it. And the reality is that the SEC has 6 teams that have won national championships in the last 6 years. Florida's one of them, Tennessee, Alabama, Auburn, LSU, and Georgia. The Big Ten's got Ohio State and Michigan. They'll soon be getting Southern Cal, who's the only top tier championship program out of the Pac-12, which is now the 10, and so forth. And so the amount of money, TV revenues, was really what drives all of this. The TV revenues that the SEC and the Big Ten colleges are getting is so far above all the rest. The ACC is third, but it's a distant third. The Big 12, as with losing Oklahoma and Texas, still have adapted, and they brought in some pretty good programs out of Cincinnati and I think Central Florida and BYU. Yeah. And the Pac-12 or Pac-10 is a distant fifth as far as attractiveness. So you're going to have all these tiers anyway in it, and to think that places like ODU and James Madison and some of these, they are Division I. It's just very tough, but that's the marketplace of it. And it's, again, I wish these players, if they could play pro like basketball players do after 1 year, or baseball players straight out of high school, same with hockey players. They don't have any restrictions on them other than you can't enter into binding contracts until you're 18 years old. But and the thing with football, and the same to some extent with hockey, is these are sports that have a lot of injuries in them, and I just hate it when I see any college football player who has just great prospects get injured playing college football. Like Hendon Hooker got injured last season. He would have been a first-round draft choice, and he got injured and ended up being, I think, a third-round pick. And hopefully he recovers from his ACL knee injury and does well. But you just hate seeing those injuries because they're not making the money that they could. Meanwhile, the colleges, they're making literally billions of dollars off these players. And coaches, by the way, move from place to place. And I don't think there should be limits on how much coaches get paid either. Again, that's the marketplace. The one thing I like at Tennessee is they're expanding Neyland Stadium, and not a penny of this is coming from the taxpayers nor from the students. They're getting it from donations from their ardent fan base with it. And I suspect Florida's that way. By the way, I just gave a speech at the Virginia Energy Summit. You'll like this. I was fumbling around, quoting Steve Spurrier.
All right, yeah.
Steve Spurrier.
Well, we got the statue of Steve Spurrier. Steve Spurrier, Tim Tebow, and Danny Wolfel right in front of the I was going to say the O'Connell Center, but that's the basketball arena in front of the Swamp.
All right. Well, at any rate,
Yeah, but go
I
ahead.
was watching a replay of the 1998. Oh no, maybe it was a history of college football. Regardless, it was at any rate Spurrier getting introduced as the new head coach at Florida, and he quoted jurist Oliver Wendell Holmes, who observed, and this is what he said: "What's most important in life is not where you are, but what direction you're moving." And so what he wanted as a new leader of the Gators was their football program to move in the right direction rather than mediocre or lagging. And I said, similarly, we all want our Commonwealth of Virginia to be moving in the right direction. There was one radio person who heard that I had quoted Spurrier. She's an Ole Miss fan. She said, "You got to get on our show. I love it that you quoted Steve Spurrier in a speech on energy policy in Virginia." So.
Senator, I want to just ask you one more question about sports. I know we usually talk politics. We will be talking about that in just a moment for people listening in, but we are going to tap into this last question. Just bring up your dad. Your dad was the head coach of the Redskins, 6 years, Hall of Fame coach. They finally got a new owner there. Do you think with the new ownership coming into the Redskins, it's going to bring some new relevance back to Washington, D.C. with this Washington Commanders? Now, I have trouble saying Commanders instead of Redskins because it's
well, my father's with the Redskins for 7 years, but
right.
The previous owner is a very vengeful, litigious person, so I need to watch what I say. I just don't want to waste money on attorney's fees because of it. I'll say this. I'll be diplomatic. I cannot imagine any owner that would not be an improvement for the owner of, I call them the commodes. The WC all over the world means water closet. So I call them the woke commodes. And one of the better things that has cheered up the fan base beyond having an owner because the fans wanted to change an owner for probably 15 years or more, is they want to change the name, and they don't like this name Commode or Commanders. And so actually the owner, the new ownership, and Magic Johnson's one of the minority owners of the team, and said, well, let's hear the fans say. And the fans, if they put it to a referendum, the name would be the Redskins. I don't think they're going to go back to the name Redskins. But I do think, in a way of fumigating the franchise, that they will, in due time, and fairly, not this season, but in the future, I think they'll be looking at a better name. In fact, even the rollout of the new name was a disaster. They had a logo. They had the wrong years for when they won championships. I mean, it's just inept bumbling of everything. And I mean, it was such a dud of a reaction to the name. So the new ownership is undoubtedly going to be much better, and you can see the fans' reaction. It's like the Wizard of Oz singing "Ding Dong" and so forth. So
that was pretty good.
And then, but the one thing with that Mary Jo White report, which was very limited in focus to the previous owners grabbing a woman, and the Mary Jo White found that to be true and confirmed, and also cooking the books or swindling other owners, other partners in a fraudulent way of the money that should have been paid into the league for events at FedEx Field. So those two things were confirmed. There's so many other issues, and who knows how much more intrigue there'll be, but there's a sense of optimism amongst Washington fans with the new ownership.
Let's switch back to politics. With that, obviously the presidential primaries have kicked off on the Democrat side and the Republican side. Of course, the Republican field is huge right now. What's your opinion on the presidential primary so far?
Well, it's surprising to me, Rob, that former President Trump is doing so well. It's just a surprise to me. I have not endorsed anyone. I think that our governor here in Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, let's see. I'm going to wait and see what he does. I think he'd be outstanding. I think he could. And if you care about what William F. Buckley said, is nominate the most conservative candidate who can win. I think Glenn Youngkin would, every state that President Trump would win, he would win. And then he'd win Virginia. And I think he'd have a much better chance of winning Georgia and Arizona and maybe Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan. You know all the battleground states, Rob. You're an expert in this. And but I think he could win. Now, at this point, President Trump's doing very, very well. But I know Mike Pence. I know virtually all these people. I admire Mike Pence because he upheld his oath of office. January 6th mattered a lot. That riot was awful. That was a disgrace. It was criminal. And Mike Pence, though, under a lot of duress, upheld his oath of office. And but he's just not seemingly catching fire. We know Nikki Haley, and I think I'm one who likes people who have a record of performance, and I kind of have a bias towards governors when running for president because they've been a CEO rather than just a legislator. Although you can have a business person who also understands an organization. And I like Mike Pence. I like Nikki Haley. Asa Hutchinson, I think, did a great job in Arkansas. One guy who hasn't gotten much attention, but has intrigued me, I think would be great, and I've only met him a few times, is Governor Burgum of North Dakota. I like that he started a small business fella, ended up being a company of 2,000 employees in North Dakota, comes from a small town. So he knows business. He knows he's an entrepreneurial person. He understands what needs to be done to make our country more competitive. He understands energy and how important that is for our competitiveness and security. And I also like that he doesn't think the federal government needs to be meddling in all sorts of issues, including abortion, which I think should be a state decision rather than the federal government. Now, I've heard he's somehow has gotten on the debate stage, and I think this debate coming up shortly in a few weeks in August in Milwaukee, there'll be some that are going to drop from that, and I think someone will be surprised will say, "Hey, I really like it." And Vivek Ramaswamy on economic stuff and issues, he is great. There's certain things, though, that disqualify candidates as far as I'm concerned. And those who are I'm not saying this is for me. I have my own criteria. You have yours, Rob. Your listeners have all their attributes they like to see in a candidate or a president or governor, senator, member of Congress, whatever. But these ones who are saying that that we should stop supporting Ukraine in their war for their sovereignty and for their freedom against this Russian invasion, any of those that are doing that, to me, are weakened. And Ron Desantis, who I think has been a fantastic governor of your state, he and Governor Kemp and Christie Noem and Abbott and Lee of Tennessee and all of them, they were great during this pandemic. But the more and more that Governor DeSantis speaks and takes positions on certain things that seem kind of extreme, or I just don't like him, or vacillating. He was doing better before he ever announced than he has since he's announced.
Yeah, let's dive into that, Governor. Sorry to interrupt you, but
no, that's okay. You're from Florida. You probably have a better perspective than anyone else.
Well, I just want to bring up the governor. The governor's campaign was riding high. Obviously, he had a legislative session, so he didn't really go on the campaign trail. Then, obviously, President Trump gets indicted with that issue, and that came up, and all the hoo-ha down in Miami and stuff like that. And then we see all the steam from the governor's campaign just goes down and like a rock. And the steam right now, I believe, is, whether we like it or not, is with Trump and Vivek. And those are the two guys that are really riding high right now. So I honestly don't know what happened with the governor. I think he's, I agree with him on a lot of these culture war issues, but I think he's playing that hand too hard. I think his hand was good when he was pushing the COVID issues. People loved him. People were moving to Florida like it was going out of style. I think he needs to go back to speaking about what he did with COVID, speaking about freedom, speaking about what he's done in Florida. And instead, he's bringing up these cultural issues that are not going to play good in Virginia with these moms. You won these voters. You know these people. These are Glenn Youngkin voters. These are people that voted for Ralph Northam, and then they switch over to Glenn Youngkin. We just saw that with the McCullough Youngkin election back in a couple years back. So.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. And Florida, Governor Desantis and his leadership, and there were other states. I actually think Governor Kemp of Georgia was even better, and Kristi Noem was great in South Dakota. All the Plains states, Oklahoma, Texas, Nebraska, all the Dakotas were great, and Tennessee and South Carolina and Georgia. But for whatever reason, it's just his presentation, the sound, and gosh, they put out that video, the anti-gay video, and I'm just thinking, come on. To quote Joe Biden, come on, man.
Come on, man.
What are you running this kind of stuff? This is just divisive. Now, Florida, though, one of the reasons Florida is such a great state for business, as is Texas and Tennessee and North Carolina and Arizona and Nevada and so forth, is you have no state income tax. And so Florida has been a good state. I think Governor Bush did a great job when he was governor. And so Florida has been a state that people have been moving to for a long time. It hasn't just grown recently. The thing of the pandemic, though, is all the trends of people moving away from high tax, high cost states of New York, New Jersey, Illinois, California, Connecticut, all these states that are literally losing population, that have been going to Florida and Texas and Tennessee and South Carolina and out west going to Nevada and Arizona and Utah and Idaho. All those trends were already there. It was accelerated, an exodus of people from those high tax, high cost states that also were lockdown states. Invariably, they were restrictive states on people and enterprises and livelihoods. And so that accelerated that migration to a place like Florida. Heck, listen to the way you talk. You're not a native Northern Floridian. But and in fact, you see interviews of people, in Florida, and they have New York or New Jersey, they have Northern accents.
Well, a lot of them are former liberals that got sick, and as am I, got sick. And I was a Bernie Sanders leftist. And I got sick and tired of the crap,
Well, see, then those states ought to learn. I always say AOC's mother has years ago moved to Florida. Too bad AOC's not as economically literate as her mother, that she likes to keep more of what she earns rather than paying in taxes and so forth. So Ron DeSantis, I think, inherited a winning team. Florida was already a winning team before he was governor, but I think it became an even more admirable winning team with his management through the pandemic. And the media was always criticizing him, these paranoid hypochondriacs that dominate the media in DC and New York, just saying, oh, look at these heartless people. They all ought to be wearing 2 masks and be caged in their homes. And how can you let people on the beaches, and all this nonsense that everyone looks back and sees what harm was done to the education of children and all the rest. And so the fact that the media was criticizing him, for those of us who like free people and free enterprise and have some balance in saving lives and livelihoods, DeSantis as governor became a national hero because of the criticism from these halting, paranoid, hypochondriac dictators.
I want to get into Glenn Youngkin. I know you just spoke about him just earlier. He is being pushed into the presidential race. Whether he'll take the full dive in or just put a toe in is another story for another day.
We have legislative races this year in Virginia,
right?
Just like the Virginia's race being an off-year election, everyone paid attention to Virginia and New Jersey. In New Jersey, the Republican almost won in New Jersey.
Yeah.
No one thought he had a chance. But if people had put some money into that, he would have. The Republicans would have won. So there was a wave or a trend that people didn't recognize till election day in favor of Republicans against Democrats. Youngkin, though, has to pay attention to these legislative races here in Virginia for our House and state Senate. The House is Republican, the Senate is Democrat. And if we switch to, because Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears is a Republican, then that'll help him get his agenda through on accountability and choice in schools, lowering taxes and supporting law enforcement and doing some of the damage that was done during the Northam administration in a variety of ways.
So if Youngkin does come in, how do you feel like that would affect the race with Trump and Vivek and this other, Haley and Tim Scott and all these guys?
It's hard to say. I could speculate. It's hard to say. He's not our legislative.
But Youngkin, as you stated, Governor, Youngkin can win these. Some of them are like middle of the road. These, soccer moms, as George W. Bush used to call them. Now,
but the question is, Rob, will the voters in Republican primaries think that way? Because you could have national polls, and it could be really. That's the other thing. Desantis, when he first got in the national polls, DeSantis versus Biden, DeSantis was doing better than Trump. The more recent polls, he's doing worse than Trump. Now, national polls, as you know, are interesting, but not dispositive. What matters are the battleground states.
State polls, yeah.
Georgia's crucial. Arizona's crucial. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, those, Nevada possibly, and Virginia. Virginia's really not a battleground, but if Youngkin were running, he'd win. I think he'd beat Biden. In fact, what's holding up Biden, in my view, is that Trump is, at this point, looks like he's going to be the Republican nominee. If the nominee were someone other than Trump, I think the Democrats would run someone other than Biden.
Newsom.
Yeah, it could be Newsom.
Because Harris, I'll tell you what, Harris is no chance. They could put up DeSantis, Pence, Haley. It doesn't matter. Harris would get her ass kicked. I hate to use that kind of language on here, but what's true is true.
Yeah, well, let's see. Now, Youngkin, though, so if I think that the way that a scenario for Governor Glenn Youngkin to get involved is we have our elections, first Tuesday in November, and if the Republicans flip it, I think that could propel him. That would be an accelerant, and then he could get in November. The question is what's the lineup going to look like in November? They'll already have had several debates. Clearly, by then, there'll be some candidates who've dropped out. There may be somebody who's caught fire. It could be Ramaswamy. It could be Pence. It could be Nikki Haley. It could be Burgum. I don't know. See, Burgum's kind of similar to Glenn Youngkin.
But Burgum's got the money. The question is, if Youngkin jumps in, will he have that back?
By the way, Glenn Youngkin's got, I don't know.
Yeah, I know he came from financial services, but
he put 20 million of his own money into the governor's race, which is a big slug.
Yeah, you ain't kidding. Okay. All right. So all right, just making sure. But it's going to be tough because Youngkin, I mean, you know him obviously better than I do. He seems like he's a nice, genuine guy.
He
running against somebody like Trump, you got to go toe to toe. This guy is going to beat you like a drum. And I know you endorsed Rubio in 2016. Obviously, from my state, we know Marco Rubio very well. Marco knows what he's talking about, but he's not really a fighter in that aspect like Trump is. The question is, Governor, is that can Youngkin go toe to toe with Trump like somebody like DeSantis could, or someone else?
The only one, I don't know. Glenn Youngkin is a genuinely good person. He really is. I really like him a lot as a person. Obviously, I like his policies and ideas as well. Right. And he understands the competition between the states. He is not known as, a overwhelming
nasty guy.
Yeah, he's not. And the two people that President Trump fears in a debate are people who are part of his administration. One is Mike Pence, but Mike Pence is too deferential. But there's a way I could imagine Mike Pence saying something that is, he doesn't have to be mean, but solid. The other person President Trump fears is Chris Christie. Chris Christie is just, you talk about something, not that I'm for Chris Christie, but I want him on the debate stage with President Trump, because Chris Christie is, he's
he knocked Rubio down in 2016, if you remember.
I know.
Like on Brock, too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And you know the trial techniques or the jury persuasion techniques that he uses, and he does it very effectively. And he may be a kamikaze candidate, but he's one who's very articulate and very good on these kind of rhetorical debating situations. And I think heck, he did debate prep for Trump. This would be like running the scout team, so the strengths and weaknesses and what are the things that agitate him or set him off. And President Trump is generally one who's easy to set off and get off on detours and tangents and so forth. And Chris Christie could do that. So it may be that others knock themselves out, and somehow then folks will say, well, I like this Youngkin guy. He seems clean and rational and reasonable, and he's not a diatribing, screaming maniac, and seems to be conservative, but a common sense conservative on the side of parents, and the side of law enforcement, and lower taxes and American energy and so forth. So it's a scenario, but as so long as President Trump has this dominating lead, it's going to be tough. So he's got half the support, and the other half is for someone else, and they're all so diffused. And this is how he got the nomination in 2016. But he's in a much President Trump is in a much stronger position now, because he didn't have those armies of support for him who like him. And then and if this ends up Trump versus Biden, where you got 60-70% of the American people who don't want that to be a rematch, this no labels batch, depending on who they run, they could end up getting some votes in it. And that'll be another calculation that's too hard to predict at this time, because we don't know what actually will happen.
So we're back here again for people listening. This is former governor, former U.S. Senator George Allen from Virginia. We are talking about all things sports, politics, and every other thing in the kitchen sink. But I want to dive into President Biden a little bit. You were serving with him in the U.S. Senate as far as that goes for 6 years. Can you speak about the president? Did you have a lot of dealings with him? And has his politics changed, or is he just catering towards the far leftists in the Democratic Party?
I think it's most of the latter. I did, his office and mine were on the same hallway in the Russell building. I was on the Foreign Relations Committee with him. Some of the time he was actually chairman of Foreign Relations. It was switching around between, first it was Jesse Helms, and then him, and then Dick Lugar, and then Biden again. So we got along well. I considered him left, but left of center. He worked in a bipartisan way in the Senate, and we got along well. And the Senate's a very collegial body anyway, and you just generally get along with everyone, and even people who you're rarely in agreement with, you find once in a while. Barbara Boxer and I, even Hillary Clinton and I sponsored a bill together. I'm not running for election or the Republican nomination, which would be a killer to admit that. But you find 1 out of 100 issues that you find people on the other side, and you got to do it in a bipartisan way. President Biden, though, is governing to the far left and catering to that far left that he needed to get to win the Democratic Party nomination in 2020. And it's been a disappointment. I was thinking, but when the Democrats, I know you were for Bernie Sanders, and I admire
Well,
Bernie.
I was in the liberal hysteria at that time.
Okay. Well, I admire people who stand for, I admire George McGovern. I didn't like him, but I said at least he's a liberal and he doesn't hide it. He's not one of these who says, oh, I'm a moderate, but their record is far left or very liberal. Biden, I thought, for the Democrats was the best person they could nominate in 2020 to win against Trump. Because people thought, oh, he's Joe, he's left of center, he's reasonable, he's an adult. The media, of course, gives him a break. He'd make gaffes all the time. Oh, that's just old Joe. Isn't that endearing? If it were a Republican, they'd be ripping him.
It's a shred.
A new one. Yeah, exactly. So you have generally a compliant media who also liked him, but his policies, particularly on energy, and it's just awful. His first act as president is stop the Keystone XL pipeline, and he's always talking about union jobs, because if it's not a union job, it doesn't motivate him. Well, that knocked out, I don't know how many tens of thousands of union jobs. And I can't believe the pipe fitters union knocking out that pipeline go along with this. And it's just terrible. And so, I'm not saying he's done everything wrong. I think the infrastructure bill, to the extent it was focused on infrastructure, was a good bill. But the rest of it is, I think, very harmful to our country, whether it's the debt and deficit spending, wanting to increase taxes. But his energy policies, to me, are the most absurd. And of all things people ought to learn out of Ukraine and our friends in Europe who were captive customers of Russian natural gas, is how important energy is, not just for our country and the cost of fuel and gasoline and electricity and so forth, but how important it is for our balance of trade and for our allies, for our national security. And it's just, and these New England states, they're getting oil from other countries because they don't want pipelines bringing energy in there, so they're getting it by ship from Venezuela or OPEC or somewhere, and it's just absurd. So he's been a disappointment in the way he's been governing as president.
I want to ask you this question. There was a video, and I'm not sure if you saw this video or not. Someone was speaking with General McChrystal. Obviously, you know who he is. His son is working in the DIA right now. And the video, and I just want to read this correctly because I want to get this comment correct. It says he didn't believe that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline was blown up by Russia or Ukraine. He said the U.S. made more money off the deal than anyone else, and indirectly said that it was basically we did that. Now, my question is, Governor, if that is true, what kind of precedent does that set to the rest of the world if that is true? And also, how does that affect our foreign policy if we're doing that to sell more liquefied natural gas to Germany and these other European countries?
Well, the ones hurt most by that were obviously Russia. Russia finances its entire economy by oil and gas.
Right.
And they now have putting in all these pipelines to China, which obviously will just buy everything they can. The Europeans are going to stop buying anyway. The point is, liquefied natural gas doesn't necessarily come from the United States only. Qatar has been a country that's been predominant in liquefied natural gas way before the United States. Australia is also an exporter of liquefied natural gas. So it doesn't necessarily inure to the benefit of the United States with it. And I'm not going to, so I'm just talking about the economics of it.
Sure.
The other thing is the best way to get natural gas, by the way, that liquefied is a way of getting it, but it's much more expensive than pipeline gas because you got to freeze it. You got to get it so cold the gas liquefies. It takes special ships and equipment to transport it. So you need that sort of that enormous facilities to liquefy it as to export, transport in a special vessel. Then wherever the port is of destination, you need to have the equipment, the facilities to then properly and safely bring it back into gas form, and then have it connected to pipelines to wherever you're ultimately sending it to, or however you're going to distribute it in a particular country. There are some pipelines that have been proposed throughout the years from say across the Caspian Sea or the Black Sea. There are some pipelines being proposed out of Libya and North Africa into Italy and into Greece. And so that pipeline gas will be much less expensive. So there's other ways to do it. The other thing is Europe has some natural gas too with it, but they still don't have the distribution system. For example, they're bringing LNG, liquefied natural gas, to Spain, but they don't have a pipeline through the Andean Mountains, or the Pyrenees Mountains, between Spain and France to get into the continent. The other thing is you're going to learn a lot about energy policy and foolish energy policy from what the Europeans did even before it. The Germans in particular, overreacting to Fukushima, the nuclear disaster in Japan. They started shutting down their nuclear facilities and thinking they're going to run their economy on wind and solar. And they realized, and natural gas. And then the natural gas prices went way up. And wind and solar, which are dependent on the weather, are costly and intermittent and unreliable. So what they've been doing is buying a lot of coal from the United States. Norfolk is the biggest coal terminal in the world. And so actually the United States has been selling a lot of coal into Germany because they needed, for their economy, to keep their coal power plants operating. But the point is that they had a kind of a whimsical, foolish energy policy. France, on the other hand, gets about 75% of their electricity from nuclear. And it may be blasphemous to say this, but we can learn from the French when it comes to nuclear and the way they reprocess the spent
fuel. We
fuel.
definitely need to, extend on nuclear in this country. It's very forbidden. Right. And the climate change group is pushing against nuclear. That's something that we need to really hype up. It's safe, it's effective, and we need to get that going. They talk about foreign oil, but they don't do anything. Solar is good in certain aspects of the country. The wind thing, I think, is a joke. I'm sorry.
I agree. But it's worse than a joke. It's worse than a joke. The cost of the offshore wind will work about a third of the time. And it's so costly. These platforms cost a lot of money.
And they look foolish in the ocean.
When they corrode, you have to transmit it. There may be an effect on aquatic life. It's absurd. Solar, you're right. Putting solar panels at Dulles Airport where the grass is and nothing's growing, put that there. Put them in parking lots where it shades the parking lot. Put it on roofs.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. And it's fine as a supplement, but you're not going to run your economy on it. Natural gas, hydro is the best, but hydroelectric is pretty much determined by your terrain. And you need to have terrain like you have in Idaho and Oregon and Washington, where the Columbia and Snake rivers can be dammed up, or the Colorado River, I suppose, too. But natural gas can be done anywhere. Coal can too, but natural gas is cheaper than coal these days. Now, if you want emissions-free electricity, the best reliable baseload is going to come from nuclear.
Right.
About 100 nuclear plants in our country. So long as they're operating safely, they ought to be relicensed. A new idea, and I told Governor Youngkin, I'm so happy and proud of him for this, is using what are called small modular nuclear reactors. These are smaller, they're prefabricated and brought to a site Virginia has the largest naval base. We have aircraft carriers and we have submarines that are made in Connecticut and in Newport News shipbuilding. And they'll run for the entire life. They never have to be refueled, the new ones. So I asked a guy that these nuclear physicists from Virginia Tech, I said, I've been trying to figure out if you hooked up the USS Ronald Reagan, a big aircraft carrier, to a city, how many people or residences could that benefit? And he says, oh, that's classified. I said, well, could you do some extrapolation? No wonder I can't figure it out. It's classified. And so he told me, he said, one of them, that it's not exactly the same power, but the point is that our aircraft carriers and subs are operating safely for the men and women on them, and it can be done. So you use that technology for generating electricity, but just one of them, the aircraft carrier, would power 37,000 residences, which is the same as the city of Portsmouth, which means nothing to your listeners, but 37,000. So if you put a bank, 10 of them together, a facility on an abandoned coal mine or some place like that, you could extrapolate. Now, the capital cost of nuclear is way more than coal or natural gas, but it's reliable and it's emissions free. And it seems to me that's the way we need to be going as a country if you want emissions free, and maybe a little bit more costly, but it's less costly than offshore wind, which is just ridiculous. And onshore wind is ridiculous. The only thing worse than onshore wind is offshore wind.
It's bad.
Made in China, and it's just absurd.
I want to get into some, because you obviously represented Virginia as a governor and as U.S. Senator. Obviously, all these military bases, a lot of our servicemen and women are in Virginia. The U.S. military in the past few years has gotten horrific with all this woke ideology. It started with the Biden administration with the vaccine mandates. They're funding all these transgender surgeries now. I mean, what is going on with our country? China is laughing at us. They don't do that stuff with the transgender surgeries. Even with TikTok, I'm not for censorship with TikTok. I'm not for censorship with anything. But if you look at the Chinese TikTok, they're teaching kids math and science and all this other good stuff on TikTok. Ours is girls doing dances, showing off bikinis and all this other stupid nonsense. But go back to the military thing, because it's really getting out of control. The retention of troops is bad. Even trying to get kids in there because they're so obese or they're playing video games all day. We can't even get our kids in there. And the country is in bad shape. This is killing our country, the obesity and this woke ideology that's playing out all throughout American society.
Yeah, well, the services are having a hard time recruiting new men and women to serve. There's if somebody's gay and wants to serve their country, they ought to be able to do so. If someone's transgender,
but we're talking about the operations and stuff.
Oh no, the transgender. If you are transgender and want to serve, you can serve. But the taxpayer shouldn't be paying for these optional or elective surgery any more than they should pay for facelifts or tattoos or anything else. And but none of this, you call it wokeism or social engineering, whatever you want to call it. And it was just terrible, the forcing of young, healthy people to get COVID vaccine, when if they care about following the data or the science, anybody generally under the age 40 wasn't really at risk unless they had one of these comorbidities. But if you're in the military, you do have to pass a fitness exam, and these 99.999% of them are very healthy, and so they ran people out. They actually dismissed them, discharged them from the military because they refused to take the COVID vaccine. But I'll always remember, if you want to realize the political leadership of the military, when asked what's the greatest threat to our country, they said climate change. Not China, not Russia, not Iran, not North Korea, climate change, the weather. And I'm just thinking, but that's how they get to be on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is you play that political game and say that climate change or global warming, whatever term you want to use, is the greatest threat to our country. And they know darn well that is not the case.
Well, you got people like me, Governor, that don't trust the government anymore on climate change, on these other issues because of the lying of COVID. They kept changing the story about, we had guys like Governor Newsom that said, stay indoors, lock you down. And they were going out to eat at expensive restaurants, having birthday parties, like it was a big joke to them.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of people my age, older, younger, they're voting for Republicans, not because maybe they agree with them 100%. Maybe we agree 50, 60, 70%. But we're fed up with the woke stuff. We're fed up with the lying, the cheating, the stealing that's going on in our country, especially the past 3 years. And people are fed up. And me personally, like I said, I voted every Democrat my whole life. And it's gotten to the point the past 3 years, because of COVID, because of the lies and all this woke ideology that's being pushed in the schools, the grammar schools, the high schools, the colleges. I don't know if you heard this, but in Brown University, this is a fact, statistical fact, 38% of students at Brown University believe that they're LGBTQ plus. 38%. That's a lot.
What do you mean they believe it? What do you mean they believe it?
They subscribe to, you write what you are, I guess, binary, non-binary. I don't know all this stuff. It's all
I know, I'm learning it myself.
It's all not a silliness to me, but regardless of that, they say that they are personally LGBTQ+.
Oh, I see.
So 38% of students at Brown University, I know this is a liberal school, but regardless of that, 38% is a lot. And these are kids, and I'm sorry to say
speaking, it's about 5% of the population or less. I don't know what it.
Well, they brainwash the kids at the schools. You go to these schools, some of these schools, not all of them, of course. That's just a generalization, but you go to these schools and they teach kids that, your governor did some great things with these kids. They have these books in some of these schools about teaching boys about touching other boys and doing sexual things. Really disgusting stuff. I went to Catholic school, grammar school, high school, not in college, but I went to private school in college, and I never heard of any of these things growing up with all these sexualization of children. It's pretty disgusting.
Well, it all comes down to, the battle ends up being really, in effect, the parents and empowering parents. You want your kids reading these things, and parents, no one's going to care more about their children than their parents.
They do hide it from the parents, though, Governor.
Well, that's wrong.
Yeah, and it's disgusting. We have people like Governor Desantis and Governor Youngkin that are passing these bills, or trying to at least get some of these bills passed, to bring the parents more in with the education. You love your child. You want the child to be the best they can be. And the only way they can do it is if they're involved with the education. I mean, this is common sense things, Governor.
Correct. Yeah, you're right. Well, then that I think was, of all the issues that propelled Glenn Youngkin into the Virginia governor's, was that parents matter.
Well, Terry made a big mistake in the debate when he came out and said, I forgot the true comment. You probably remember it better than me, but it was something to the effect of, they make the rules. It's not the kids. The parents, rather. It's the teachers make the rules.
Yeah, we don't want parents telling teachers what to teach their kids. And then on top of it all, they had this transgender guy in Loudoun who went in a girl's restroom and assaulted a young girl. The father was all upset. He gets arrested, and they surreptitiously then send this kid, the offender, the criminal, to another school. No one tells anyone about it. They keep that all quiet, and he assaults yet another girl. And the only person who was prosecuted was the father of the girl who was a victim. Now we have Jason Miyares now as our attorney general, and he's cracked down on all of this. And, but because it was in Loudoun County, Northern Virginia got national attention. And so everyone in the country knew about that disgrace.
Yeah. I want to touch on this economic trends in our society right now. We see the unemployment is down to lower than 3%. The thing is, a lot of people don't know about that unemployment number. That's kind of a fictitious number. There's a lot of people that, may have stopped even searching for working. That's not included in that number. The mainstream media won't go and speak about that because they're in the tank for the Democratic Party and for Joe Biden. Regardless of that, what are you seeing with the economic trends of the country now? It looks like the Fed is going to raise the rates again, which, in tune will make sure that people are not going to buy houses. They're going to stick to renting. They're not going to buy the cars. They're going to stick to leasing. With that said, so are we more moving to a rental society, whether it's a renting house or renting cars, renting everything in plain English?
Well, if it costs too much, if you can't afford, especially in housing and cars and leasing, both, if people can't afford to buy it or can't afford the loans, that's the way they're going to have to go. The multifamily housing has been in recent years what people could afford. And housing prices, though, because there's not that much of an inventory, there's an insufficient inventory. So the price of housing, of shelter, has really gone up. And when interest rates go up, it's fewer people can't afford it.
But shouldn't we keep interest rates pretty high for a while to kind of flatten out this crisis in general?
Well, you knew interest rate. Once you had the government spending so much money stimulating the economy, and it's one thing to do it during COVID when the government's shutting down a business. You should compensate people that the government, for their public purpose, shuts down a business. They ought to be compensated, but it far exceeded that, and it was paying people not to work, and it just went on and on. I think the Trump administration, their initial tranche or two was fine, but the last one out of the Trump administration was too much, and then the Biden ones were too much as well. So you knew this is going to happen with this deficit spending and the size of our national debt, which means
but was it more, Governor, that these
and then energy prices. Plus, when energy prices go up, energy's in everything from agriculture to manufacturing to data centers to running a grocery store, and so that affects everything as well. The interest rates, when you look at it historically, these are fairly reasonable interest rates. It was ridiculous. Actually, having interest rates at 1 or 2% is why the federal government got away with that deficit spending. When you're paying 1%, that's easy. But now, when interest rates going up in this upcoming budget, there's going to be more payments to paying interest on the national debt than we pay in the entire Department of Defense budget. And that's poor priority. No one's getting anything out of paying interest on the debt. So the interest rates and what the Fed's trying to do is understandable. And you want to keep inflation lower. And because inflation is just, and inflation eats away of people's wages. You could say, oh gosh, I've gotten a 3% salary increase, but if the cost of living has gone up 4 or 5%, you're actually losing ground. And so you do want to get inflation under control. And so I don't think increasing interest rates, and they did it today, another 0.25%, and they'll probably do another 0.25%. And I don't see them dropping it. No. I think what they ought to do is pause, see what the effect is of these interest rates, and try to get some stability to see the effect of really fast ratcheting up of interest rates, but let it plateau for a while and see what the effect is on the economy. And you're right, the unemployment rates are low, but the labor workforce is a lot of people not in participating in the workforce.
But Governor, was it more so that people were getting paid not to work, or these states were getting tons of money, billions of dollars in these ARPA funds, but they were playing with those ARPA funds and putting it to whatever they wanted it to go to. Might have nothing to do with the COVID crisis.
Oh,
It could, yeah. So was it? I mean, I can see that it was. People needed to have some money, otherwise they were going to lose their homes. But my thing was, where the money was going to the states, and they were putting that ARPA money, the American Rescue Plan money, to whatever whatever they wanted to put it to. So I think that was the bigger problem. Would you agree, or
yeah, but it's part of the problem. I wouldn't say it's bigger or less, but it's part
Okay.
of it. It was like a slush fund and all sorts of things that it was being used for, and it ratcheted up spending. And so then it's and people get dependent on some level of spending. The states, again, you go back to the states that did not lock down. You look at employment levels, say February or March of 2020, and so forth. The states that did not lock down have not only this was last year, had not only recovered all those jobs, they were at 120% of the jobs. Virginia didn't catch up till much later. And it was Youngkin coming in and liberating Virginia from these vaccine mandates. The University of Virginia was forcing students to get COVID vaccines to stay in the college. Meanwhile, they're teaching courses, online. And it's just so detestable and arrogant and shameful. And then Youngkin came in and said, all right, we're not going to force these masks on kids in schools. We're not going to force vaccines on schools, and we're going to open schools to in-person learning. And I think people have seen that the learning loss, especially for elementary and middle school kids from low-income families, has just been devastating. It's just terrible what's happened beyond the medical things and the mental health problems, the drug and alcohol abuses and addictions during this. Humans are meant to be free, not to be caged. But these folks in their really dictatorial ways and their self-righteousness about it was so wrong. And hopefully we'll learn from it. And the other thing is, governors have a lot of authority. Just because you have the authority doesn't mean you ought to use it. And I think people like you that are younger, I love it when you say you don't trust them, because one of my favorite bumper stickers was question authority.
Yeah. Question
authority. That means question the government, question conventional thinking, question the trends or whatever is popular at the time. I like people who are nonconformists because it means they're thinking for themselves. I may not agree with them, but I said I just admire people who think for themselves rather than say, well, this is what's recommended. I just got a car and they recommend rotating the tires every 5,000 miles. I said, yeah, well, my recommendation is every 10 or 15,000. So I don't follow recommendations if they don't make sense.
Well, there was a saying, Governor. It says, if the government says they're here to help, run. And
yeah, well, that's Ronald Reagan. He says that the most frightening words in the English language is, I'm with the government and I'm here to help.
So I figured I'd bring your man into this. But regardless of that, it is a great saying by the former president of the United States. I want to break down the last two questions. I'm going to combine these together. They are about COVID. These are audience questions. Dr. Redfield, the CDC director under President Trump, along with the FBI, the DOD, and a few other agencies have came out and said they believe that COVID was a lab leak in Wuhan, China. Do you agree with that in those agencies and Dr. Redfield? And also, if you do, how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again if we're doing this type of dangerous research?
Well, you don't fund it. I don't know what the need is for funding it. And I think it's very logical, and I do agree with them. And it's logical that it came from a lab that's actually doing research, and the lab was in Wuhan. So it's not as if the lab was in Kansas City, Missouri, and the leak was in Wuhan. It was there, And some of these products, as I think they also indicated, there were certain leaks in previous viruses in China, and China doesn't have the same standards or care about human life that we do in our country. And so I see no reason for us to fund it. The other thing I think we learned from this. So yes, obviously I agree with them, and it's also logical. It's just common sense. And they were trying to blame it on wet markets, and China cheats and China lies, and so do all governments. But China's world-class 5-star liars and cheaters. But the other thing that we've learned from this is we as a country are too vulnerable and dependent on active pharmaceutical ingredients from China. We need to be onshoring manufacturing of pharmaceuticals in our country, so that because we have high standards of safety and efficacy. You wouldn't feed your dog food from China. There's been dogs that have died years ago with food, yes. Dog food from China. Here we are ingesting medicines where people are sick, so they're having to take pills or get injections, and you don't know if it's diluted, whether it's fake, whatever it may be. They don't have our standards. And so we need, for our own national health security, just like we need American energy security, we need national health and security. And granted, it's cheaper to manufacture some of these drugs in countries that don't have our standards, but this is too important to not have. Whether generally, I think it should be the U.S. or at least from a supply chain that is reliable, whether it's Canada, whether it's France, whether it's Switzerland, Germany, Britain, wherever it may be, but not with China. And China, even with the protective equipment, they wouldn't even send us masks. Not that masks apparently did much good other than harm your breathing. I always would wear a neckerchief or a bandana. I just refuse to wear those stupid things unless they force me. And then I'd break the string off my ear. Oh gosh, it broke. Isn't that a tragedy? I don't know what to do here, ma'am.
Governor, you got some good material today that you're bringing to the table. I want to go to this last question because we are running out of time.
Yeah, fire.
I speak to a lot of people in the Republican base now. They're voting for Trump. They're voting for Desantis. They're voting for Vivek, regardless of who they're voting for. They're talking about issues with the vaccine. Now, I do want to tell everybody that's listening, the vaccine is safe and effective. You should talk to your doctor about vaccination. Again, with this saying, we're seeing a lot of people that have had adverse reactions to the specific COVID-19 vaccine. We are not anti-vax on this program, but we do want to talk about people that have vaccine injuries, excuse me. And this is a big talking point with the Republican base all around the country. What would you tell people that are listening that are vaccine injured? What would you say to people in the base that are very concerned about a lot of people suffering from myocarditis or other neurological and vaccine-induced issues?
What I would say is think for yourself. And I think it's important for the research to be done on any adverse effects from this vaccine. I'm not anti-vaccine either, but I am absolutely against vaccine mandates or dictates as a condition of work. And I love that Tennessee passed a law that prohibited any state agency or company from forcing people to get a COVID vaccine as a condition of work. I was on this National Coronavirus Recovery Commission from the start with the Heritage Foundation, people from all over the country. The people at risk of COVID are generally elderly people who have heart or respiratory problems, maybe obesity. Those are the folks that maybe a vaccine or a booster at this point might be of some use. I got my vaccinations. I only speak for myself, and I got one booster. I said, the heck with it. Then I got COVID this February of this year and lived through it. I said, gosh, this is as aggravating sick as I was from the stinking booster shot with it. And so I have natural, and I'm not going to get any more of them. Now, here's my reasoning. The key to it in figuring out the efficacy of any of these shots is whether the virus mutates. And this COVID-19 virus is constantly mutating. And so these mRNA vaccines are trying to catch up. And so again, I'm trying to be honest with folks. I'm one who never got flu shots because the flu shots were based on previous iterations of the flu. And I said, if I get the flu, I'll be sick. It's a forced diet for 4 or 5 days while you're not eating and puking and whatever else you're doing. So that's me. So I'm trying to be honest.
Yeah, we appreciate
full disclosure. But I think that there are some people, and I do think originally the vaccines, the evidence that I saw was that while it didn't spread, it obviously didn't stop you from getting it necessarily, and it certainly didn't stop you from spreading it. The people who are vaccinated, it seemed to me from the evidence I saw, there are fewer deaths and fewer severe hospitalizations on account of getting it. But I've also seen credible evidence that there's a lot of people who have maladies, long maladies from the vaccine who were vaccinated. And you mentioned those. And I think that's serious. And, whenever you see drugs on TV being advertised,
the side effects,
all of the disclaimers, you're just thinking, gosh, don't operate equipment. You'll be irritable. You'll be, sitting on the commode all the time or, whatever. And you hear that. And I said, you watch it and you think, what the heck is this drug for? It's just live with it rather than have to get all those so-called side effects from it. It's just not worth it. So people ought to be aware and make decisions for themselves. That's why I'm saying I'm not against vaccines, but I'm absolutely opposed to government dictates or mandates to get them.
Yeah, and I appreciate you being honest with the audience and myself. And I think, again, we're not against vaccines, but we think that if there is a lot of side effects happening with any sort of medication, vaccine, non-vaccine, we need the government to do their job and investigate these issues. So
exactly,
and we need
to get data on this because it affected people differently. And I think the more I've learned, if you keep living, you keep learning. But genetics, I think, is a factor in this. There's some people's genetic makeup that it affects them differently. And I appreciate you and all the broad range of subjects that we covered from the Southeastern Conference and football and sports to other things that matter. And that is getting our country safer and stronger and more competitive and finishing off on COVID vaccines and boosters and all the rest. But I wish you and your listeners all the best and hope everyone has the rest of a winning summer and a winning football season and year ahead.
Yeah, Governor, I always appreciate your honesty and time on this program. And thanks so much for always giving us the time of day and coming on this program. And hopefully you come again, down the road.
All right. I'll see you on the trail ahead.
I got my COVID-19 vaccination, and here's why. This isn't about gimmicks or sentiment or what commercial I like. This is about facts. COVID-19 vaccines are safe and effective. Millions of doses have already been given in the United States, and these vaccines have the most intensive safety monitoring in U.S. history. People from different races, ages, genders, and ethnicities participated in large clinical trials around the world to make sure this vaccine worked for all kinds of people. The amount of time and effort dedicated to developing these vaccines was huge. Scientists used existing research and technology so they could get the vaccines developed quickly and safely without skipping any steps. If you need any more information, use a reliable source like the CDC website to get the facts. I got my COVID-19 vaccination, and here's why. This isn't about gimmicks or sentiment or what commercial I like. This is about facts. COVID-19 vaccines are safe and effective. Millions of doses have already been given in the United States, and these vaccines have the most intensive safety monitoring in U.S. history. People from different races, ages, genders, and ethnicities participated in large clinical trials around the world to make sure this vaccine worked for all kinds of people. The amount of time and effort dedicated to developing these vaccines was huge. Scientists used existing research and technology so they could get the vaccines developed quickly and safely without skipping any steps. If you need any more information, use a reliable source like the CDC website to get the facts.